Eli Saltzman. I'm the director of the Gildenhorn Institute for Israel Studies, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce the last speaker of the semester, Mr. Barak Ravid. The Talmud says, and I'm going to do this in Hebrew, מקצת שבחו של אדם אומרים בפניו וכולו שלא בפניו. This translates to something to the effect of a person should not be praised while present. There's a quote of Barak Ravid that I want you to confirm whether that is true or not, that I saw in the past. I can't find it again, but it was something to the effect that an American policymaker, I don't know who, said, if you want to know what I think, speak with Barak Ravid first because he knows what I think before I do. Or something to that effect. Are you familiar with that one?
Yeah, it was Secretary of State Blinken. And he didn't say that I know what he thinks. He says that I know what he's going to do before he...
I got you. All right. Thank you for that clarification. In any case, Barak Ravid is a senior political reporter and Middle East expert for Axios, covering foreign policy in the 2024 presidential election, and recently a political and foreign policy analyst with CNN. In the last 18 years or so, he covered extensively the Middle East, mainly Israel's foreign relations and national security policy, in addition to its political system. He covers the U.S.-Israel relationship, the Iran nuclear crisis, the Palestinian peace process, and so on and so forth. He reported for more than 30 capitals on 5 continents, published numerous scoops that influenced foreign policy and drove debate in Washington, Jerusalem, and across Europe and the Middle East as well. He's the author of Trump's Peace, the Abraham Accords, and the Reshaping of the Middle East in Hebrew 2021, in English 2023, kind of the authoritative account of the diplomatic developments leading to the signing of the Abraham Accords in September 2020. He will address that accord, or these agreements, and the current events, of course, and hopefully discuss how the two are related to one another. So without further ado, the floor is yours. You can sit, you can stand.
Thank you so much. Thank you. First, thank you for inviting me to speak here. I think it's the first time that I'm speaking at a university in the U.S. I think that's the first time. So it's a great honor to do this here. And you know, when we started discussing this session, it was in a different era and in a different world. It was pre-October 7th, when we were talking about whether there's going to be a peace deal with Saudi Arabia, you know, it can't feel further away from that at the point that we are in. But I still want to start by talking about the Abraham Accords, because when I started writing the book, I came back from Morocco in December 2020, when Israel, Morocco, and the U.S. signed the deal to re-establish relations between Israel and Morocco. And a good friend of mine, it was a very short trip, but it was actually, for me as a journalist, was one of the most interesting trips I had. And I came back from the trip, and I spoke to a good friend of mine who was working at the time for President Rivlin. And she said, why don't you write a book about this? And I told her, do people even read books anymore? I'm not sure. And then I said, you know what, I don't care if they read books or they don't read books. This is, for me as a journalist, was such a, you know, those several years before, and the way to the Abraham Accords was just so, you know, full of events and exciting, and you know, it was such a professional experience for me that I said, you know, I want to write about this regardless of if people want to read it or not, because I just want to write it for, you know, so that I want to write the full account of how we got here, and I want to be the first one to read it, to write it, and hopefully one day at some university somewhere, it will be in the library, and somebody in this course, you know, a student will say, I want to write about, I don't know, about Israel's relations with the Arab world, and then he'll go to the library, and the librarian will tell him, yeah, there's this book that this guy wrote in Israel. Actually, nobody read it, and it was a disaster commercially, but it has a lot of detail, so maybe you should check it out. So I did it, and actually, I was pretty surprised that, when he came out in Israel, it became a bestseller, which at least to me sort of brought back some, faith in, the fact that people are actually interested in stuff like that. And when you work for so many years on those issues, you think that nobody gives a shit, but then you realize that people do. It's actually, it gives a lot of motivation to continue. Hey, thanks. That's the English version that came out in May.
Available on Amazon. Use the discount code Ravid for President or something.
It was, and actually, it took me a long time to publish this in English. I had an agent who was trying to talk to publishers, and all the this thing in America that I find sort of astonishing, that we went to the more liberal publishers and they said, oh, the book is not anti-Trump enough, and then we went to the conservatives and they said the book is not pro-Trump enough. So, nobody, and I just said, who cares about if it's pro-Trump or anti-Trump, it just tells the story, and then they told me, well, the story doesn't sell books, which was, kind of sad, but anyway, so I just decided to do it myself, and it's on Amazon if you want to read the Anna Karenina of the Abraham Accords, 650 pages. If you're that masochistic, you can get it online. Anyway, I think that at that time, and by the way, I still think so, even post October 7th, that the Abraham Accords were the biggest breakthrough in a Middle East peace process in a generation. I know it sounds sort of, I don't know, out of touch or, funny, crazy, whatever you want to call it, to talk about this now. But still, if you look at, the facts, we've been, since the, peace agreement between Israel and Jordan, there was sort of a desert of positive progress in Middle East peace. We had, an intifada, several wars, several rounds of failed peace talks, and here, after a long, long time, we had actual, peace agreements between Israel and Arab countries, and I think it was a huge development, especially that for Israelis, for many, many years, one of the things Israelis aspired to is to get legitimacy and acceptance in the region. Okay, whether you are an Israeli that wants to sideline the Palestinian issue and you're looking for it, or whether you're an Israeli that wants to have peace with the Palestinians, but also wants to get, legitimacy and normalization with the rest of the Arab world. And I think across the board, it's something that Israelis aspire to, and this is, I think, this is why those agreements were celebrated in this way in Israel, because it sort of was this fantasy that a lot of people had that came true. And one of my conclusions in the book that a lot of people did not like is that this thing wouldn't have happened if Donald Trump was not the president. I know that's quite a statement, but I'll explain why. And the reason, there are three main reasons in my opinion. The first reason is because Donald Trump, when he came into office, there was a trust gap between the US and Israel, the US and the Gulf countries. That this trust gap was opened during the Obama administration, and mainly because of the Iran deal. Regardless of what you think, whether it's a good deal, bad deal, was a good thing to withdraw from the deal, was a bad thing to withdraw from the deal, it doesn't matter. But what Trump did, again, regardless of what you think about his policies, the result was that this trust gap was closed. Second reason is because of the people that Trump appointed to work on this file. As you know, he appointed his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. that a lot of people here in America said, oh, that's nepotism, why did he do this, who works like that, we need professional people to deal with those issues, etc., etc. On the other hand, in the region, including in Israel, this appointment made a lot of sense to a lot of people, because people understood that when the president appoints a member of his family to deal with something, this means this is something he cares about deeply. And it also means that that person that the president sends is not just a diplomat that has like 10 degrees of separation from the president. It's somebody who can pick up the phone and speak to the president right away. So if this whole thing ended with failure, everybody, I guess, would say that, oh, you know, what do you expect? You appoint your son-in-law, that's what you get. But if at the end, this resulted in, you know, 3.5 peace and normalization agreements between Israel and Arab countries, you know, you have to acknowledge that maybe it was the right thing to do. And the third thing, and I think the most important one, is that Trump was ready to put his hand in his pocket and take out tangible deliverables to those Arab countries in order for them to take this last step and normalize with Israel, to make it worth for those Arab leaders to do it, and to show their public opinion that it was worth it. With the UAE, it was the F-35 deal that the Emiratis got. With the Bahrainis, it was an upgraded trade agreement. With the Sudanese, it was taking them out of the terrorism, state sponsors of terrorism blacklist. And with the Moroccans, it was a recognition of the Western Sahara as part of Morocco. And again, regardless of what each of us think about whether it was a good move, it was a bad move, we can argue. The fact that Trump agreed to do it, okay, gave those countries the incentive to go for those deals. And I'm not sure that if at that moment it was, let's say, Hillary Clinton, she would go for, she would agree to do those moves that at the end of the day convinced those Arab leaders to go for those deals. And I think that when you look at even now, post-October 7, when you look at those agreements and what they did, obviously it's not all a rosy picture. There's a lot of opposition to those agreements in the Arab world, in the region, including in those countries. And you see that the support for the Abraham Accords over the years in some countries decreased quite significantly, including in the UAE, for example. On the other hand, when you look at the results, you see that it brought to the region a lot of good things. Increased trade between those countries, and an enhanced ability to cooperate on regional security issues, also through the US Central Command, especially on issues like missile defense, and we see the results of that actually now with joint work on intercepting attacks from Iraq and from Yemen. And even with you know, people-to-people issues, and especially when it comes to Israel's Arab minority. One of the most interesting things I heard, and I only heard it after the Hebrew edition came out. Mansour Abbas, the leader of Ram Party, one of the Arab parties in the Israeli Knesset, called me after the book came out and said, you know, Barak, I have to meet you. And we met, and then he said, you know, when the Abraham Accords were brought to the Knesset for you know, a vote of approval, we had there was still, back at the time, there was still this big Arab joint party, the Arab Joint List, that was formed. It was 4 different parties that were together in one party. They had 15 members of Knesset at the time, and they had a discussion on how to vote on the Abraham Accords. It was on the peace treaty with the UAE. And the headline of the vote was approving the peace treaty between Israel and the UAE. And they all wanted to vote against, and Mansour Abbas told them, listen, we cannot, with our political platform, we cannot vote against something that has the word peace in its headline. So let's just go to the bathroom when the vote is happening, and when we come back after the vote. And they all said, no, we have to vote against it. And then they had an internal vote, then there was a majority for voting against it, and they all voted against it. And a week later, there were polls done that showed that 65% of Arab Israelis supported the Abraham Accords. And he said, I look at the polls polls that they did internally in the party. And he said, I looked at the poll and I said, that's it. I'm leaving. I'm running independently. And that was his decision back at the time. And obviously then I told them, why are you telling me this now after the book came out and not before? Because it's a great story. But I think that one of the things that the subtext here was that the Abraham Accords gave Arab Israelis the ability, for the first time in years, to connect to more parts of the Arab world, and in this way to have more opportunities when it came to education, sports, employment, cultural exchanges, and so on and so forth. And again, a lot of things that are, part of our daily lives, that when you're an Arab living in Israel, you're more, you don't have, an open access to, again, a lot of other parts of the region, which are, again, part of your culture and part of your traditions and part of your religion. So it opened up a lot of opportunities for Arab Israelis, and I think this is why they got so much support. The October 7th events obviously challenged the Abraham Accords quite significantly, but when you look at it, you see that none of those countries cut relations with Israel, which I think is a very interesting thing. The UAE was the first Arab country to condemn Hamas for the October 7th attacks. The Crown Prince and Prime Minister of Bahrain was the first Arab leader to condemn Hamas for the October 7th attack. Morocco also, less clearly, but also condemned Hamas, and again, not in the same direct way as Bahrain and the UAE. And I think that overall, the agreements, at least for now, sustain this huge crisis. Then the big question is, and it was the big question, literally before October 7th, in Saudi Arabia. I remember that a few days before the war, Blinken was supposed to go to Saudi Arabia, and I wanted to go with him, and I came to my editor and said, well, Blinken is going to Saudi Arabia, maybe I should go with him. And he said, no, you just moved from Israel to the US just a few months ago to cover things here. Why do you want to go there? And then 3 days later, I was told, you're doing only Israel. which showed you how the world changed in a few days. But it was literally to say that literally days before the October 7th attacks, the US was working with Saudi Arabia, with Israel, also with the Palestinian Authority on trying to get this deal done. And they were relatively close. I think let's say if October 7th didn't happen, I think that most likely that during the first quarter of 2024, there would have been a deal. Now, obviously, it's not the case, but I mean, without the Abraham Accords, we wouldn't even have this discussion between Israel and Saudi Arabia. That until the October 7th sounded like it was those negotiations on this deal were going on openly in the press, with nobody denying, nobody's saying, no Saudi going on Al Arabiya or Al Jazeera and saying, oh, that's all nonsense, it's not true, we're not talking to the Israelis. On the other hand, Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi Crown Prince, going on Fox News and saying that every day we're getting closer to normalization with Israel. It just happened at the end of September. So, without the Abraham Accords, this would never have happened. So I think, therefore, it's safe to say that it really reshaped the region. It also reshaped the region because it led to a very significant Iranian pushback. Because if you think about it, after the Abraham Accords, before the Abraham Accords, Iran worked with its proxies on encircling Israel, Hezbollah in Lebanon, pro-Iranian militias in Syria, Islamic Jihad and Hamas in Gaza. After the Abraham Accords, the Israeli Minister of Defense arrived in Bahrain, 100 miles from Iran. He arrived there in an Israeli Air Force plane. There is, right now, an Israeli IDF officer based in Bahrain in the 5th Fleet headquarters. The Israeli military officers go to the UAE all the time, go to Morocco. Moroccan special forces come to train in Israel. So when the Iranians looked at the region, they saw Israeli forces in Bahrain, Israeli forces in the UAE, Israeli airlines fly over Saudi Arabia to Thailand, to India. They saw Israelis in Azerbaijan, up north. So they saw the same process that they were doing around Israel was happening around them. And they pushed very, very hard, including serious threats to the UAE and to Bahrain and to other countries that still did not normalize with Israel, like Oman. If you look at the Sultanate of Oman, I think that's the place where the Iranians had the most success. The Omanis were, I think, inching towards maybe not the same kind of normalization like the other Abraham Accords country had, but something in that direction, and they pulled the brakes on it, mostly because of Iranian threats during 2022 and the first half of 2023. And this Iranian push, I think, also, again, it also created this, it also continued this shift in the region. And I think that all of those things are still, this process is still alive. Meaning, even though we had October 7th, I don't think the process that started with the Abraham Accords is dead. I think it's still alive, and it's going to continue. The only question is, after October 7th, what's going to be the context and how long it will take until we'll be able to go back on that track, because the basic interest that led all the regional leaders to start this process are still there. The Iranian threat for them is still there, the economic benefits are still there, and the interest of having closer relationship with the US, that's definitely still there for all the relevant regional actors, and it's going to stay that way. And the question is how it will manifest itself after October 7th. That was a short presentation, and I would love to get to answer any question you might have.
Alrighty, let's open the floor then. Enough is first, I see. All right.
I get this question a lot from other people, and I kind of struggle with answering it. But they ask if Donald Trump had still been president, would October 7th have happened?
Ah, wow. I don't know. You know, if Trump was the president, would happen? I don't know. You know,
well, he said that it wouldn't have happened.
Of course, every good thing,
Just like the
every good
Ukraine
thing that
war.
happened because he was the president, and every bad thing that happened will happen because he wasn't. Okay, whatever. I don't know. And if there's one thing I learned is that, you know, as journalists, we're not oracles, and we should, you know, we should put most of our effort on covering things that happened, and not, instead of like writing about things that, you know, might happen or could have happened, or, you know, because that's really, you know.
This is why we have academics, just like this. Jim.
Of the countries that signed the accords, they're not proximate to Israel. I mean, if you take a look at the countries on the border, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, what's the difference in thinking between the countries that encircle Israel and the countries that are a little bit of a distance? And if I can just that was hard enough, but let me complex it one more time. I mean, just given the current situation, whatever somebody thinks or doesn't think about the Palestinian issue, is it at all in the interest of any of Israel's neighbors to sort of help with the Palestinian question as opposed to simply inflame it?
Let's start with the first question. You know, and this is something that I heard from an Emirati official in February 2020, so 6 months before the Abraham Accords. We met in Munich, and it was the first time ever that I met an Emirati official who's from the UAE, meaning that not somebody who's based outside. And one of the things he told me is that no Emiratis did not kill Israelis, and Israelis didn't kill Emiratis. So there's no basic animosity between the peoples. Meaning, you know, in Jordan fought wars with Israel. Jordanians killed Israelis, Israelis killed Jordanians. Obviously, huge Palestinian population in Jordan. A lot of, you know, history of conflict. Same with Egypt, same with Lebanon, same with Syria, obviously with the Palestinians. And with those countries, there's, you know, you don't have that baggage. So I think that for them, even though for, you know, 70 years, they were part of a camp that was hostile to Israel. Okay, they were part of the Arab boycott. They were part of the you know, anti-Israeli initiatives in international forums, in the UN, but there was no blood that was spilled. And I think that, when that's the case, it influences the way you look at each other. And the second thing about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I don't think that any of Israel's, or not any, but the majority of Israel's immediate neighbors, I do not think they have an interest in inflaming the Israeli-Palestinian conflict because it has a direct negative influence on their own domestic issues. Jordan, obviously, when we sneeze in Israel, the king catches a cold. Same goes with Egypt. Lebanon, obviously, not the whole country sees it, but everyone who's not Hezbollah, and I think, really wants this thing to be over because he's afraid that there will be a war between Lebanon and Israel, or between Hezbollah and Israel. I think that even Hezbollah, in a way, sort of wants this thing to be over so that it will be able to say, we did our part and that's it. So I really don't think that most of Israel's immediate neighbors want to inflame the conflict at the moment.
I'm curious how we talked about how the Abraham Accords changed things like early out of Israel. So I'm curious, how did the Abraham Accords change the relationship that people in like the UAE, people in Bahrain have to the regimes there? Did it change?
So just to follow up on Charlie's question, the Washington Post had a major poll that came out, right? And it was pretty unequivocal.
Yeah, so there was a poll that was done, I think it was just 6 months ago, that showed, again, a decline in support of the Abraham Accords, especially in Bahrain, the UAE, a bit less so in Morocco. Actually, it was interesting because in that poll, it showed a dramatic increase in support of normalization with Israel in the Saudi public, which was kind of strange because they still did not have, maybe this was the reason, they still don't know, us, so they think it's, look, none of those countries is, a Jeffersonian liberal democracy. So I think that, in Bahrain, you did see protests against the Abraham Accords and also more protests on Gaza. And by the way, the interesting thing in Bahrain, that when you look at the discussions in the Bahraini parliament, okay, which again, it's not exactly Congress, but in relation to in comparison to other Gulf countries, that's more than you have in all of those, maybe except for Kuwait or something. It's very interesting because you have a big constituency that is very critical, but you also have a constituency that is in favor. I would think it's like 60-40 against, something like that, or 65-35. But it's interesting because you see the debates, and it's an interesting debate because it's not just it's not only political. I mean, there's more interesting than that. But in Morocco, for example, when the Abraham Accords were signed, the party was the majority in parliament was the sort of the Moroccan Muslim Brotherhood party, and the prime minister at the time was pretty much against the whole thing, and they lost the elections, whatever that means. But they lost the elections, and the party that came to power was much more favorable of the Abraham Accords. In the UAE, for example, the accords were approved by the Council of Rulers. There are seven emirates that are part of this federative state. And usually you pass decisions by consensus. Okay, but that doesn't mean that before that there are no differences between the different rulers. And there were some of the rulers did not think it was a good idea to go for the Abraham Accords. So again, it's when you analyze it, it's very different than how we analyze politics here, obviously. But when it comes to public opinion, the Abraham Accords, I think it's safe to say there's quite, I think, big opposition in the Arab world, and I'm sure that the events of the last 2 months strengthen those who oppose it.
Do you think it's possible for Israel's Abraham peace partners, such as the UAE, Bahrain, in regards to the ongoing military operations in Gaza, where they say, look, enough is enough, and let's say Israel is entrenched and it continues and gets what they think is out of hand, could they say, we're willing to get rid of the Abraham Accords? Is that a possibility, or you don't see it?
It's definitely a possibility. At the moment, all of those countries want Israel to destroy Hamas. That's the fact. So regardless of what they say in public. But I think it's also the other way around. Meaning, there will be a day where the war will end, and people will need to have an exit strategy. And the Israelis are fantasizing or hoping or lobbying, how you want to call it, those Arab countries to basically be the ones who will take over. And those countries tell them, for now, you're crazy, we're not going to do it. We're going to do it if the political context will be different than it is now. We want to know what are we investing in? Are we just investing in infrastructure that 5 years from now you'll bomb again? Okay, are we just building more targets for the Israeli Air Force for the next round of violence? Or are we, as the context, a political one, meaning relaunching peace talks, end game of two-state solution? What's the end game? What's the political context? And for now, the Israeli government doesn't want to talk about political context, and therefore, for now at least, it is stuck without Arab countries that are willing to come in and be part of a solution for the day after the war.
The student in the front row.
I had the privilege of reading some drafts of this book, and we had some vivid conversations / heated arguments that almost descended into violence on the question of Palestine and Palestinians and how significant are they in this. Right, we have a chapter there, actually, I think it's an excellent one. But I wondered how your view of this changed, if at all, after October 7th, of the importance of the question of Palestine for all of this extravaganza that is called the Abraham Accords, and the future one and the past one.
Look, if I the unpolite way of asking Shai's question was to say, why are you calling it a peace agreement? It's not a peace agreement, okay? Which is, again, it's a legit question. And let's go back to July 1st, 2020. What was supposed to happen on July 1st, 2020 is Benjamin Netanyahu starting to annex the West Bank, okay? That was the plan at the time. A lot of people think it's a spin, okay? He never meant, it was just, and the people who think that is usually the Bibi haters, that they hate him but they admire him because they think he's this Machiavellistic magician that always knows what to do, and whatever he does, he always gets, his way. Which is a good story, but it's not true. Because he really wanted to annex the West Bank. And he got into a point where, because of his domestic political situation, and because of Donald Trump, and because of the Arab world, he couldn't do it. And the Marathis, when they came with this idea, they came with this idea in order to stop Netanyahu from annexing the West Bank, and they managed to do it. And if you're a believer in two-state solution, there are some people who still believe that. This was something that bought more time, put more time on the clock. And by the way, in the years since the Abraham Accords, the issue of annexation, okay, even though on the ground there's a creeping annexation all the time, okay, but the issue of making it an official thing never really came up again by significant people in Israeli politics, and Netanyahu never spoke about it again, and the reason is because nobody wants to lose this thing. So I think that by that it did contribute a lot to. Again, if you believe in two-state solution, then the Marathis put more time on the clock, and that's not something small. I also think that at the end of the day, when I look at the Israeli political map, and when I look at where we were pre-October 7th with the negotiations with Saudi Arabia, this was the only thing that puts some sort of brakes on what the radical right-wing Israeli government was planning to do in the West Bank. Okay, the hope that there will be a deal with Saudi Arabia created some inhibitions in parts of the Israeli government, and prevented some of the crazy things that they wanted to do. Some it did not. So, did the Abraham Accords solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? No. By the way, it was never its intention. That was not the goal. But did it? Since then, I think we did it sort of create more things that Israeli politicians need to take into consideration when they take decision on the Israeli-Palestinian issue? No doubt. And I know it sounds, like, not very convincing, but things could have been much worse. I know it's not a big comfort to anybody, but whoever knows closely enough the group of crazy people that have ministerial jobs in the Israeli government knows very well things could have been much worse. And I think that one of the reasons that it is not much worse is the Abraham Accords.
Alex W.
While you were reporting, just before you had the idea to write this in a book, what was one of the moments where you were like, this might get over the finish line, and kind of what was that process like, out in the field?
Well, when it actually happened, nobody knew about it. It's something that surprised everybody. I was covering the whole issue of annexation during June and July, and I remember that on July 1st, when on the one hand Bibi didn't start the annexation, on the other hand there was still nobody knew that there's this Abraham Accords thing. All along this time, I was thinking, okay, what now? And because a very small group of people dealt with it, it's I think 5 people. 5 people in, like it was 2 people in Israel, 2 people in the UAE, and then so 6 people, and 2 people in the US. Those are the people who were handling this for quite some time. That was very close hold. And so when it happened, I remember there was an hour before it happened, before the statement about the Abraham Accords came out from Trump's Twitter account. There was a report on Channel 12 in Israel, which is the biggest news channel, of one of the most plugged in Israeli reporters, especially he's very plugged into Bibi. And he reported that the Trump administration is going to announce that it's allowing Israel to annex the West Bank. An hour before the announcement came, which was completely the other way around, okay? And I remember that I heard this report, and I said, and this was really something, I knew that this was not in the cards, okay? But because it was a guy that is so connected to Bibi, I said, maybe I missed something in the last few weeks. And I started calling everyone I knew in Washington, like calling, texting, emailing, WhatsApping, any messaging app you know, I was there, okay? I texted somebody on his Instagram to try to figure out whether something was going on. And they did not, none of them responded, okay? And an hour later, it turned out that the report was totally false and that the reality is completely different. But it was it was done so secretly that, you know, to the point that somebody, again, reported the complete opposite just an hour before.
You had a question?
Um,
Was it answered?
No.
You want to ask?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Following up on the idea of it could have been even worse. I just wonder how helpful a framework that is, given that, you know, we have like 15,000 dead Palestinians. Like, it may have been even worse, but
it's not a comfort, okay? I'm just trying to, you know, to describe my analysis of the, you know, of the reality. And by the way, when I'm talking about worse, I'm talking about not necessarily now, only now in the current conflict. I'm talking about, for example, do you know who Itamar Ben-Gvir is? Everybody here knows who Itamar Ben-Gvir is? Yeah. He's our David Duke.
Yes.
And, you know, on the, when was it, the first week of the government or the second week, can't remember. I think on the first week, he went on the Temple Mount, okay? And one of the results of him going to the Temple Mount was that the Emiratis canceled Bibi's trip to Abu Dhabi, okay, Bibi and Sarah. And this was, believe me, a very big hit for Bibi and Sarah, because, you know, for them, this was supposed to be like the vindication of, here we're back and we're going to celebrate our legacy achievement, and they canceled it. And I think that, again, it's an anecdote, but it tells a bigger story of, I think that at that time was when Netanyahu realized that, you know, those people need to be reined in. It doesn't mean that they were, okay? Not always, but the result was that Ben-Gvir, the next time he went on the Temple Mount was not next week, but was, I think it was 4 months later, or something like that. And this, again, it's an example. The potential for destruction and disaster from those people is immense, Okay, some of it happened. Okay, it's not like situation is not good. Okay, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying that could have been 100 times worse. And I think that part of the reason that it's not the case is because of the Abraham Accords. And you know, the Emirati foreign minister, ahead of the election, a few weeks before the election, the Israeli election, last Israeli election, he came to Israel. And he made rounds, he met with all the heads of the different parties other than the Jewish supremacists. And in the meeting with Bibi, he told them, you know, if you win the election and you form a government with those people, we will not cut ties with Israel, but you know, we will basically freeze the relationship. Okay? And when you think about it, that's, you know, something pretty bold for a country that until 2 seconds ago didn't even have relations with Israel, and then it's diving like that into Israeli politics and basically telling the guy, you know, basically putting an ultimatum. And you know, for Bibi at the time he needed to form this coalition to get out of jail, or to try and get out of jail. So this was a much bigger interest for him, and this is why he did it, and this is why the Emiratis froze the relationship. Nothing really happened, nothing good happened between Israel and the UAE since this government is in office. So again, I'm not saying that they have huge leverage or that they use it every day or that they're always successful. I'm just saying that that a lot of the things they do, I think, do contribute to, you know, making things less bad. Yeah, I think that just
We have 5 minutes
Yeah, 5
because
minutes,
Barak
yeah.
Ravid was called to give an interview. He's providing commentary for CNN.
Yeah.
Please go ahead and sit. There's literally a CNN truck somewhere around you.
no, right here outside.
Just outside? I got you.
Hi, Barak. Congrats on the new position.
Thank you.
I have 2 questions. They're not very related, but one is about, actually, I listened to a podcast hosted by Lex Feldman. He interviewed Jared Kushner about a month and a half ago. It was a 3-hour-long podcast.
Yeah, I didn't survive after the first half hour.
So one of the things Jared mentioned that I'm wondering what your thoughts are is that he brought up the issue of how delicate the situation they kept when they were handling the Abraham Accords versus how the Biden administration handled the peace deal between the Saudis and Israel. They were very public, whereas the Trump administration was very quiet, kind of behind the scenes, making all the moves, and then just announcing that the deal was made. To what extent do you think that helped or provoked, well, helped them, but like provoked this current situation? Could it have helped if it was a little more underneath, behind closed doors? Do you think? It's just a personal opinion. That was one question.
Yeah, just a very short answer. I don't think it, you know, I don't think it matters mostly because, and again, the Trump administration actually deserves a lot of credit for it because basically Biden built on what they started. And because of what they did, the Saudis got to a place where they don't need to be discreet like the Emiratis, because when the Emiratis did it, there was nothing. But the Saudis are now, it's a different region, it's a different dynamic, different reality. They don't need to do it that secretly.
Got it. And then the second question was, what, in your opinion, how big of a role do you think the anti-MBS people may have played a role in this? There are a group of anti-MBS folks who are very wealthy, who are not within the inner circle of MBS, that do not like to have this peace deal, that I'm not seeing it being discussed much in the media or by journalists. I'm not really sure why. And also, what about the role of Turkey? Because Turkey is a major geopolitical power. It's the biggest backer of Hamas and Muslim Brotherhood. And they are like extremely ambitious and see themselves as Sunni leaders. and they're kind of tying their whole strategic autonomy, they're aiming for their autonomy from the West,
Yeah.
and they're tying their legacy to the Palestinians. Why isn't there more talk about these two actors?
So first about Turkey, just an interesting anecdote that I think explains it. When Erdogan saw Netanyahu at the UN, just again, it feels like it was a decade ago, it was 3 months ago. They met the UN. First thing Erdogan tells Netanyahu when they sit in the room, first thing, he said, just for you to know, I'm totally supportive of what you're trying to do with Saudi Arabia. First thing, out of his mouth. Don't get me wrong, don't think I'm against it, I'm in favor of it. Obviously because Erdogan also improved his relations with the Saudis quite a lot. Second, again, I think MBS realizes, because of what happened in Gaza, that, and obviously because of the opposition he has at home, is that any future attempt to go for normalization with Israel will have to be with a much more meaningful and significant Palestinian component than he thought about before October 7th. And I think that therefore those voices inside the kingdom that are, let's say, more old guard people, I think they'll have more say in the day after October 7th. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I was so short on time, but it was really great talking to you, and I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much.